What if Ukraine's abrupt plea for a ceasefire isn't a show of strength, but a desperate effort to stave off catastrophe? Imagine, in a single relentless day, more than 450 drones and almost 30 missiles crash into the heart of Ukraine's energy system. The aftermath is instant and devastating. Kyiv, Kharkiv, Dnipro, and Odesa, cities with populations in the millions, are suddenly plunged into darkness, grinding daily life to a halt. The blackout is total in some districts. Residents lose not only electricity, but also water and heat. Public transportation collapses. Subways grind to a halt. Roads jam for endless kilometers, and families trek home through shadowy, silent streets. Students abandon frozen lecture halls, and hospital staff scramble to keep critical patients alive on backup power. This is not a random outage. Rolling blackouts and emergency shutdowns have become the new normal for millions, shifting life from routine to survival. Official guidance is blunt, even bleak. Keep your phone charged, fill every container with water, and brace for the worst. These are not precautionary words. They are daily reminders as the emergency deepens. The grid repairs, experts warn, may take not days, but months. As the first icy winds of winter rattle apartment windows, survival is no longer theoretical. It is an everyday struggle. For the first time since the invasion began more than 2 years ago, Ukrainian leaders are openly calling for a ceasefire, and not a distant diplomatic one, but a truce right now. This is not political theater. It is a profound shift that forces urgent questions onto the world stage. How close is Ukraine to collapse? What does this sudden reversal reveal about its defenses and capacity for endurance? Disregard these signals, and you miss the real story. A conflict tilting beneath the surface, with consequences that could ripple across continents. Misreading these moves could mean failed investments, misguided security strategies, or being blindsided by the next seismic geopolitical shock. So how did Ukraine reach this precarious breaking point? And what does Russia's evolving strategy reveal about the war's future? Let's peel back the layers and examine the chain of decisions, risks, and responses now shaping the next, even more dangerous phase. Picture Kyiv, a city whose history stretches back more than 1,000 years. In a single night, nearly half its neighborhoods are swallowed by darkness. Subway trains are abandoned mid-tunnel. Traffic crawls for kilometers as intersections lose their signals, and families clutch candles while icy drafts slip through broken windows. This is not a future scenario. It is Kyiv's reality. The shockwaves travel far beyond the capital, rattling other major cities and small towns alike. The attacks are relentless and meticulously targeted. Dozens of power plants, substations, and water treatment facilities are left in ruins. Engineers working around the clock warn that repairs may take until spring, if they can be made at all. In Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, entire districts lose not only power, but also heating and water, leaving more than 500,000 people to endure freezing nights huddled in stairwells and metro stations. The scale is staggering. In Dnipro, emergency workers ferry water to hospitals by hand, while in Odesa, the port city's ancient electric grid shorts out, silencing the hum of commerce. Supermarkets ration food as refrigeration fails. Local bakeries shut down, unable to operate ovens or mixers. In rural villages, farmers watch as livestock perish from cold and thirst, threatening the food supply for months to come. Public transit is crippled. Metro systems in Kyiv and Kharkiv are suspended indefinitely. Buses and trams, starved of fuel and power, are abandoned in lines stretching for kilometers. On the highways, drivers sleep in their cars during multi-hour traffic jams, unable to reach relatives or return home from work. Trains, once a lifeline across the vast country, stall on frozen tracks, leaving passengers stranded in the darkness. The government's messaging has shifted from promises of quick recovery to painful realism. Instead of restoring normalcy, officials now urge Ukrainians to prepare for weeks, even months, without basic services. The new official advice is simple but chilling. Do not count on the lights coming back soon. Do not wait for water to return tomorrow. The economic consequences come swiftly. Factories, already strained by months of war, go silent. Small businesses shutter. Unemployment soars as people lose jobs not just to fighting, but to the collapse of every service that underpins daily life. Even the country's IT sector, once a global bright spot, is paralyzed by unreliable internet and power. The stakes climb with every passing day. The longer the outages persist, the higher the risk to public safety, economic survival, and societal cohesion. If energy paralysis continues, Ukraine could spiral from infrastructure collapse into a full-blown humanitarian crisis, one that threatens not only its own citizens, but also reverberates across Europe in the form of refugee waves and economic aftershocks. How did Ukraine spiral into such systemic breakdown? Was it simply the result of relentless Russian attacks, or did a chain of risky decisions and strategic gambles set the stage for disaster? To understand the true scale of the crisis, we must trace the origins of Ukraine's vulnerability and the strategy now fueling these attacks. Only then can we anticipate what may come next. In the months leading up to this crisis, Ukrainian forces launched daring raids and drone strikes deep into Russian border regions. These operations, celebrated for their audacity, were designed to disrupt Russian logistics and force Moscow to defend a broader front. But as military historians know, bold offensives often invite even bolder reprisals. By nightfall, Russia answered with a massive escalation. Hundreds of drones and missiles rained down on Ukraine's most vital infrastructure. The impact was immediate. Cities from Kyiv to Sumy, from Poltava to Chernihiv, vanished into darkness. Power plants and gas lines were left burning, and water stopped flowing to millions. By sunrise, families awoke in cold, silent apartments, with no way to cook, call for help, or even flush a toilet. But these blackouts are not simply a technical problem. They expose the deeper reality. Ukraine's air defenses, already stretched thin by more than 2 years of war, are buckling under the sheer volume and precision of modern Russian strikes. Surface-to-air missile batteries run low on ammunition, and interceptors are forced to choose between protecting cities or frontline troops. Logistics falter, buses stop, trams freeze, and even emergency supply trains grind to a halt on powerless tracks. The failures cascade. Schools close, hospitals ration care, and daily life becomes a struggle to survive. Civilian morale, once a source of national pride, is fraying. With defenders thinly spread over at least half a dozen critical hotspots, Ukrainian commanders shuffle troops from one crisis to another, barely holding the line. Each new blow to the energy grid is not just a tactical defeat, but a psychological attack, chipping away at hope in both soldiers and civilians. As the cold settles in, the fear of surviving weeks without heat or clean water becomes existential. The government's response has grown more sober. Where officials once projected confidence in an eventual counteroffensive, now they urge citizens to brace for the worst, store water, charge phones, and prepare for outages that could last not just days, but months. Energy experts warn that shortages may persist through the harshest part of winter. The specter of mass displacement and humanitarian disaster is no longer hypothetical. It is at the doorstep. This crisis is not an act of fate. It is the result of calculated risks. Kyiv's decision to escalate near the border, though bold, triggered a Russian response that exposed every weakness in Ukraine's energy and supply networks. The gambit of brinkmanship, raising the stakes to pressure Moscow, has backfired spectacularly. Ukraine now risks losing not just military momentum, but the ability to keep society functioning at all. If these failures are not addressed immediately, the consequences could be dire. Millions on the move, irreversible damage to the nation's economic future, and a seismic shift in the region's balance of power. The very survival of the Ukrainian state hangs in the balance, while the world watches for signs of collapse or resilience. To appreciate the gravity of Ukraine's situation, consider historical parallels. During World War II, the German siege of Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, saw the population endure more than 800 days without reliable power, heat, or food. More than 1 million civilians perished, and the city's social fabric was stretched to breaking. Or consider the rolling blackouts in California in the early 2000s, not caused by war, but by flawed regulation and infrastructure neglect, where just a few days of outages caused economic losses in the billions. In both cases, the lesson is clear. When critical infrastructure falters, the consequences multiply far beyond the initial disaster. What is happening inside Russia while Ukraine reels from this crisis? The contrast could not be starker. While Ukraine is fighting to keep the lights on, Moscow's leaders are planning for a conflict that could last a decade or longer. Inside the Kremlin, the focus has shifted from short-term victories to long-term resilience. Russian officials unveil new generations of advanced weaponry and pour resources into rebuilding and expanding their armed forces. Factories that once produced civilian goods are converted to churn out missiles, drones, and armored vehicles. Russia is fully embracing a war of attrition, betting on its industrial capacity and its ability to outlast not just Ukraine, but also the resolve of Western backers. Western analysts who once spoke confidently of Ukraine's resilience are now warning that Russia's adaptability and relentless pressure demand a total rethink of Allied strategy. Unless Ukraine and its supporters innovate, technologically, militarily, and diplomatically, they risk slipping into a permanent disadvantage for years to come. Diplomatically, the landscape is shifting with dizzying speed. In a move that stunned observers, Ukrainian officials are calling for an immediate ceasefire, not months from now, but right now. This plea comes as vast regions of Ukraine lie in darkness, battered by rolling blackouts and failing logistics, while frontline positions erode under constant pressure. This call for a truce feels less like a sign of strength and more like a desperate attempt to buy time before winter's full force arrives. Meanwhile, Turkey steps forward as an assertive mediator, seeking to position itself as a broker of peace, just as pressure grows from the United Nations and the European Union. These diplomatic maneuvers are reshaping alliances and could tip the balance if the fragile window for talks remains open. But risks are piling up fast. If the crisis deepens, Ukraine could see a mass exodus as families flee unlivable conditions. Sabotage of infrastructure, already at record highs, could become routine, crippling both industry and daily life. As alliances strain and fracture, the specter of a broader, less controllable conflict threatens the entire region. Misreading these signals now carries immense peril. Missed opportunities to de-escalate, loss of global credibility, or accidental escalation with consequences far beyond Eastern Europe. For policymakers, investors, and ordinary citizens alike, understanding these complexities is not optional. It is critical for surviving the storm ahead. History offers further lessons. During the Balkans conflict of the 1990s, the destruction of Yugoslavia's bridges and power plants led not just to military defeat, but to humanitarian disaster and permanent political fragmentation. In Lebanon, repeated Israeli strikes on the power grid have left millions without electricity for weeks, fueling economic collapse and political instability. Wherever basic services fail, the consequences spill across borders, igniting new crises far from the original conflict. Winter is not just a season for Ukraine. It is now the front line of this war. As the freeze deepens, the true scale of Ukraine's vulnerability becomes impossible to ignore. When the lights vanish, who truly prevails? And what warnings echo from Ukraine's ordeal? First, resilience must be built painstakingly over years, not simply wished into existence. Decades of neglected infrastructure, underinvestment, and reliance on foreign technology extract the highest cost when disaster strikes. Ukraine's sweeping blackouts reveal how quickly the foundations of daily life, power, water, transportation, can disintegrate when basics are ignored or patched instead of rebuilt. Catchy slogans and bravado crumble before reality. What endures are diversified energy sources, robust supply lines, and military flexibility. Societies that rely on single points of failure, whether for fuel, logistics, or command, risk paralysis the moment that point collapses. In times of crisis, communication and readiness are essential at every level. It is not enough for governments to make plans. Ordinary people must be prepared to live for days, even weeks, without electricity or heat. Official advice to keep your phone charged and stock up on water becomes meaningless once entire districts endure outages for months instead of hours. Communities that coordinate, share resources, and maintain morale are the ones that endure. Reading between the lines is urgent. When leaders shift from bold declarations to ambiguous warnings, desperation is close. An abrupt plea for ceasefire, after months of hardline rhetoric, exposes uncomfortable truths, no matter what headlines claim. Ukraine's struggle is not an isolated story. In our hyper-connected world, energy shocks, supply disruptions, and military escalations spill beyond borders in an instant. A strike on a Ukrainian power plant can send aftershocks through energy prices in Berlin, grain shipments in Istanbul, or supply chains in New York. The lessons of this crisis apply everywhere. Ignore these signals, and the dangers multiply. Even the most stable society can be ambushed by a combination of targeted strikes, fragile infrastructure, and flawed crisis response. Whether triggered by war, cyber attack, or natural disaster, the consequences cascade globally. As winter tightens its grip and news cycles churn, the real question emerges. What does this mean for those watching from afar? Which choices today will decide if your own community weathers tomorrow's unexpected storm? But the picture is still shifting. To see where this leads, we must look at how both sides are recalibrating for the next phase. Across the front lines, both Ukraine and Russia are learning and adapting. In Ukraine, engineers race to install microgrids, solar panels, and decentralized generators in critical facilities. A strategy inspired by Israel's experience during the Yom Kippur War, when distributed power saved hospitals from collapse. Local communities organize mutual aid groups, sharing food, water, and warmth, echoing the British response to the Blitz in World War II, when neighborhoods pooled resources to survive nightly bombings. Meanwhile, Russia invests in ever more advanced missile and drone technologies, betting that attrition will force Ukraine, and its Western backers, to the negotiating table. The Kremlin's patience is legendary. During the Great Patriotic War, the Soviet Union endured years of hardship before turning the tide. Today, Moscow's leaders are signaling that they are prepared for a conflict that may last as long as it takes. Diplomatically, the world is shifting. Turkey's efforts to mediate recall its role during the Syrian crisis, when Ankara brokered fragile ceasefires that saved thousands of lives. The United Nations and European Union, wary of escalation, push for humanitarian corridors and temporary truces. Yet, as history shows, ceasefires are fragile. During the Korean War, armistices were declared and broken repeatedly before a tenuous peace took hold. In Ukraine, the risk is that a ceasefire now could freeze front lines without resolving underlying tensions, leaving the region in a permanent state of instability. For ordinary people, the lessons are clear. Communities must build resilience. Families need to plan for disruptions that could last not hours, but weeks or months. Businesses must diversify supply chains to avoid catastrophic losses when a single link fails. Policymakers must invest in infrastructure, train for crisis response, and foster alliances that can withstand shocks. This is not just one more news cycle. The collapse of Ukraine's energy grid, weeks of blackouts, and Kyiv's abrupt ceasefire proposal are not distant headlines. They are seismic shocks that will upend expectations everywhere. Russia's patient, adaptive strategy is forcing new realities, and those who can see through the confusion now will be best placed when the next turn comes. Today's world is more volatile than ever. The repercussions of Ukraine's crisis will ripple across energy markets, test the foundations of global stability, and redraw alliances for years to come. If we misread these signals, accept easy narratives, or simply look away, we risk far more than ignorance. We risk our assets, our influence, and our safety when the next crisis erupts. Complacency is no longer an option. The stakes are no longer just for politicians or generals. Investors, business leaders, and ordinary citizens, anyone who relies on steady supplies, reliable information, and predictable markets, now faces new dangers when old certainties vanish overnight. The 2008 financial crisis showed how quickly systemic shocks spread when warning signs are ignored. Clarity becomes your most valuable asset. In a world awash with rumors, official reassurances, and viral speculation, it is easy to lose sight of what truly matters. But those who cut through the noise and keep their focus sharp will spot tomorrow's threats and opportunities, while others are still reacting to yesterday's news. As the world teeters on a knife's edge, only one question matters. Are you prepared to look deeper and make decisions with conviction? The next chapter is coming fast, and it will not wait for hesitation. So what practical steps can we draw from Ukraine's ordeal? For individuals, maintain emergency supplies, develop local support networks, and stay informed through diverse sources, not just official channels. For organizations, conduct risk assessments, build redundancy into critical systems, and rehearse crisis scenarios regularly. For nations, invest in resilient infrastructure, foster diplomatic channels ready to act in a crisis, and learn from the mistakes and successes of others. History is turning before our eyes. Will you act with clarity or hesitate as the world reshapes itself? The answer, as always, lies not in distant capitals, but in the choices made today, in homes, boardrooms, and governments around the world.